Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. We will call the Commissioners Board briefing to order on July 17th at 2:01 p.m. We're glad you're all here. Thank you. It's nice to have people in the room with us, so thanks for being here in person. Our first topic is the Tura request for resolution for urban plan amendment, and I will invite Paul and Andrea to come up to the presentation table. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves for the record.
Okay, I'm Andrea Goss, and I'm the administrator for the Tillamook Urban Renewal Agency.
Thank you.
And my name is Paul Edwards, interim fire chief, Tillamook Fire District.
All right, thank you. Welcome. Well, I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Andrea.
Okay, so I sent you a packet, and most of the information I'm going to give you right now, you've probably seen in the packet, but the fire district has sent an application to Tura for $188,500 renovation, including a new generator. They are currently working with a 1943 World War II naval diesel powered electric generator. And they're doing a seismic upgrade beginning here in August next month, and they need a new generator. And I'll let Paul talk to that if you have questions. It turns out that the state says if we had to change our Tura plan. And by that, I mean, we needed to make a minor amendment to say the generator was not part of what we normally do. And so the minor amendment was an addition of a project. Oh, it has to be a project substantially different from those identified in section 700 of the plan. And if it costs less than $500,000. So it did that. And we would like to add to our plan this minor amendment that says removal and replacement of the 1943 World War II naval diesel powered electric generator. Four of the taxing districts that most may have some taxing in revenue income risk include the school district, the city of Tillamook, the Tillamook County, and the fire district. And we need to get at least 3 of those 4 to concur that it's okay to make this amendment. And like I said, it's a minor amendment. It will cost $188,500, which is very little in Tura money. So I sent out the packages to all 4 of the districts on June 26th. And I asked that you please respond by August 12th, but if you don't respond by August 10th, it will be assumed that you approve. So I need a written, or Tura needs a written concurrence or lack. If you decide not to concur, that's okay too. I mean, that's your choice. Questions?
I'd like to invite Paul to talk about the project, if you would.
Yes, well, currently we got a grant to do a seismic rehab on the station. That 1943 naval generator came from out here at the air base. I mean, it still works, but if it breaks down, there's no replacement parts. So we'd like to upgrade that generator along with this new seismic upgrade at the same time. It would pair really well together. It's a lot bigger generator. It would serve the station in case we had some sort of earthquake issue, any kind of emergency actually. But for the big one, it would be really nice to have a reliable generator on site. And also not only that, just for our regular day-to-day emergencies that we respond to if we have power outages, which we do in town here. So, but yeah, that's the gist of it. Mary.
Thank you.
PUD's smiling behind you when you said power out. They all just got these big grins on their faces.
They know something about that.
Commissioners?
Thank you. So I did read most of it. How large is the one that you're contemplating?
125 kilovolt.
That's not very large.
Well, It's bigger than what we have. So we're running the whole station.
Well, I don't have any issue with it at all. I'm assuming you got the funding and it needs to be done. And I'd say you made pretty good use out of something that came out of World War II. So, yes, go forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely needed. Although I imagine, that one's probably minus finding the right part. Dastardly simple to operate and fix, and it just keeps going. It's
Yeah.
like a new washing machine, that you buy today. You get a couple, 3 years out of it and yeah, but the Kenmore from 1970 is still trucking along. So
Mhm.
no, I think that sounds great. And so let me understand, just to be clear though, Andrea, this is probably your question, because this is the urban renewal district, it is us foregoing taxes in order for you to give them that money. Are these taxes we already forego and it's just because it wasn't in your plan? Help me understand why this has to come to us.
Okay, so it may affect your revenue. We don't know if it does or not, but the state law is that if you make an amendment, and like I said, this is considered a minor amendment,
Yeah.
you have to get a concurrence from 4 of the districts that would most likely risk some revenue. 188,000, I don't know how much you might risk. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because we decided years ago when Tura was formed that the county was in support and that we forego the taxes inside the boundaries of Tura already.
That's right.
Okay.
The reason we had to write this is because and I was looking for the verbiage, which is probably in your packet, but it was substantially different from what the plan already says. And
Usage than what the plan said.
Yeah.
That the generator was not an allowable use in the current plan. So it sounds like it's more of an amendment to the language of what's allowable.
yes,
Okay.
yes, it's to add, I think it's just the verbiage is to add the backup generator for Station 71, Fire Station 71.
Thank you. And I think it's a great thing to have. We were talking recently about cooling centers, and just that often, whether it's a warming center or cooling center, fire stations are utilized for that. And as we are seeing these 100-degree temperatures start to roll through, we were asked on the homeless side, just do we have cooling centers in Tillamook County? To which the answer was not yet.
Never needed them
Never
before.
needed them before, but it's a new day. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm certainly supportive of this, and I think it is remarkable that you've made a generator work since the 1940s. And I'm fully supportive of preparedness and the fire district. And it occurs to me that both of you are in relatively new positions. So I just want to say congratulations to both of you and thank you for your service, Andrea. Your position in Tura is
Thanks.
relatively new.
Yeah.
And Paul serving as Tillamook Fire Chief. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that.
Okay, so do you need an official vote from our board? You can't get it today, but we can put it on our agenda for a future meeting if you do.
I need a written statement that says you concur with the amendment or that you do not concur with the amendment. That's all I need.
Okay. So will you work with Debbie to get that on our agenda?
Yeah, I'm looking, who's Debbie?
In the-
So
in the back of the room.
Isabel has been,
Okay, Debbie Garland in our office
all right.
is in charge of our agenda and anything
Yeah, it's ready to go. We wanted to bring it.
fabulous. You don't have to do anything.
So when will you meet to vote on it? When will you decide?
We meet, our board meets every Wednesday at 9 a.m.
Oh.
for our regular board meeting. So it could be on the agenda as soon as next week.
Today's Wednesday, so next
Next
Wednesday.
week.
This is the board briefing. So in the board briefing, we talk about things and learn about things, but our board meeting where we vote about things is in the morning. So that was this morning.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it'll be next week.
next Wednesday at
Cool.
9. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I appreciate your concern and your approval.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here and thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank
Sure.
you. More the citizens, Tillamook Fire District appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. All right, thank you
Thank you.
both.
Thank you.
Good day.
Okay, our second topic of discussion is underground utilities. I believe Commissioner Olson organized this discussion,
did.
so I will turn it over to him.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about underground utilities, and we probably, maybe the general manager, Todd, and our, I'm going to say instigator, but that's the wrong word. Well, let's have those two come up if you would, please.
Our interested community member.
Yeah.
Well, I like instigator much better.
So, Mr. Messenger, Tom, I know him reasonably well. We go back a few years. And when I served on the PUD board for a number of years, he had contacted me, and I'm going to say it was 5, 6, 7 years ago at least. And we talked about undergrounding utilities, electric utilities, water and sanitary sewer, wastewater are primarily underground now. And as things roll forward, so is some internet and a variety of other things. But so we had a lot of conversations. And he and then I invited him over to PUD and we had some more, and then he had some conversations separately. And he's like a small dog that grabs your pant leg, he won't let go. And there are lots and lots of reasons to put electric utilities underground, including possible avoidance of some of the terrible fires we've seen across Oregon and elsewhere in the last few years. Probably a whole lot fewer outages because of storms that wouldn't blow down trees and knock down power lines. And a lot of other areas that would be improved, including the aesthetics of a neighborhood and maybe a downtown area. But it's never that simple. So when you start looking at it, then as is always the case, there's a financial component, there's a structural component, there's a maybe a zoning and right-of-way component, there are operational components, repair components, and when you put all that together, it becomes rather complicated. So I'll just start off by saying, just for the record, there are two types of wires that go through most communities, cities across the countryside. There's transmission and there's distribution. Transmission are the big guys that you see, the big giant metal towers that come, in our case, many of them from the dams on the Columbia River, sometimes elsewhere, wherever they generate electricity. That goes up and it comes out at a rather high voltage and is then transmitted sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles. There's a wire that goes from Bonneville Dam down to California. Anyway, they're on the Columbia River that services our area. There are, I think, 31 dams and then some other dams on various other rivers. So PUD is almost entirely powered by hydroelectric generation. So those come in the big wires. Then they come into Tillamook County in this case, and they go to a substation where it's reduced electronically through transformers down to distribution voltage, which currently is 24.9 thousand volts across most of Tillamook County. Now that's enough, that's pretty high voltage by any measure, but it's a lot less than the transmission. And those are the ones that you see up and down our streets, some of them underground. Those are the ones that service our homes and businesses. And that, I think, is what we're talking about, not the big guys, because there's a lot of reasons those don't go underground, including cost and specialized requirements to service them, high voltage itself, high water tables, which we have here, and water and electricity don't play well together. So we're talking about these distribution lines that are all over America, all over the world for that matter, and putting them underground for the reasons we said. It would be fewer outages. It would be somewhat safer. You wouldn't have cars running into poles, which incidentally happens way more than you'd think in Tillamook County and maybe elsewhere. So that's been what we're talking about. But straight out just doing that and wholesale doing, and we're going to do it across the land is not necessarily very practical. So Tom has changed his approach a little bit. So I want to turn it over to him and let him talk about a proposal. He's got two things that he's proposing, both of which have lots of logic and common sense behind them, but then of course there are factors that influence. So he can make his presentation, and then maybe we can have a conversation and see if it makes sense.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering why you needed me today.
Sure, yes, of course, Todd, go right ahead.
I thought he covered pretty good there, didn't he? Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Am I loud enough and clear enough?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Tom, will you please introduce yourself for the record?
I am sorry.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Messenger. I'm from Pacific City. I'm a, what did you call me? Instigator.
No, I called you that.
I said interested
You called me
community
an
member, but let's go with instigator.
Okay. So, what I want to do is maybe change the conversation a little bit. Doug and I had a conversation 2 or 3 years ago, maybe even 4, about, well, is anybody else doing this? Who's doing underground power? And he said, well, Pacific County up there in Washington is. And I forgot about that. Doug and I met kind of pre for this thing last Friday. And after that meeting, it came back to me. Well, what is Pacific County doing up there? What are they doing? Well, they have a PUD called Pacific PUD. And I've had 3 emails with the engineering manager this week. And he has helped me see a little better about what's the best approach. And what they did, now they started well before he got there, and he's been there a significant, excuse me, period of time. And their approach was a cooperative approach. They got all the utilities together, and I believe they got the county and some of the cities. Pacific County is Raymond and Long Beach and kind of that swath across there. So it not totally unlike Tillamook County, actually. So they got all of them together and they just started working on it. And it was the attitude of the PUD was, we want to do this. And so they move forward and they are literally 20 years into the program, okay? They are now at about 75% done. And one of the things they did choose to not do, which could be a discussion point, is their distribution lines, which are 12.5 kVA or larger, are not underground. So you talk about 24, 25 kVA lines, those would be above ground. They also had a large subdivision that was going in, and they made an agreement with the subdivision that all the houses going in that subdivision would go underground. But the point I'm coming to is this: they do not have a county ordinance or a state law governing what they're doing. They're doing it because they want to, they believe it's the right thing to do, and they're working slowly. They are, like Tillamook PUD, and I'm sure Todd can echo this, they don't have an unlimited amount of money. They have a limited amount of money. They can only do a certain amount as they go along. And they don't ever actually expect to achieve 100%. So in those conversations, my thinking is, and I'm going to be kind of blunt here, what we have is an 800-pound gorilla in the room. We have a couple of small utilities, but Tillamook PUD is the vast majority of the electric power and all of that utility stuff here in Tillamook County. So my view is that if TPUD really wants to do this, really takes it on, and they really want to charge ahead and do this and do it publicly, go forward saying, we're going to do this, set goals for themselves, tell us citizens and government agencies how we can help them do this, then I think go ahead. If they, as the big guy in the room, aren't enthusiastic and don't really want to do it, I think we're pushing a creek uphill, or up, whatever you want to call it. I just don't think it's worthwhile. So that's my thoughts right now.
So I'll just respond, then I'm going to ask Todd, it's okay if I keep going here. What he's talking about, just to be clear, are these distribution lines that are hanging out here and are servicing all our businesses and homes, to take them down maybe a block at a time and put them in a trench and probably in some kind of conduit, and then service from there. And that requires a lot of technical things. And I don't think we need to get into all that today, but my understanding is, going back a few years, like I said, there's a financial component. There's lots of good reasons to it, and there's a number of reasons that don't make sense. So I guess let me go over to Todd and see if you could talk about, and Todd, by the way, if you don't know Todd, he's been in the business for probably coming up on 30 years. He started down in California, but that wasn't his fault. There was a job or something made him go down there. But he worked for one of the big guys, a private utility, Pacific Gas and Electric. That was the same utility that burned down the town of Paradise when they had some issues back a few years ago.
Todd wasn't there.
He wasn't there. No, it wasn't. Well, actually, I think, no, he was gone when that happened. But anyway, he's got 30 years of key managerial experience in a number of utilities. So when he came back up to Oregon, then he worked at Eugene in Water and Electric Board there. And then he's been at PUD now for what, about 7 or 8 years? Something like that. So I considered him to be as knowledgeable as any general manager across Oregon, Washington, or the West Coast. And in fact, he's on some national groups now. I know he's been to back east 2 or 3 times here in the last year, and he's got a lot of expertise. So maybe he could round out what you heard and talk about the pros and the cons, and then we can see if it's something we wanted to talk about in ordinance or the county support, or say it's somebody else's problem, or what do we want to do?
Todd, please introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. My name is Todd Simmons, and I'm the general manager at Tillamook Peoples Utility District here. We provide all of the electric service for the county, as well as parts of Clatsop and Yamhill counties. So about 23,000 customers. We cover about 1,150 square miles. We've got more poles than customers. So that tells you kind of, you're quite aware of our terrain, and but that kind of tells a story about what the infrastructure is required. Like Doug said, all of our distribution voltage is at 24.9, and that's something that some utilities decide not to put underground. So that would be our entire distribution system. Certainly, we've got services that run from the transformers to the individual residences and businesses and stuff like that, which are at a lower voltage. But if you'd like, I could roll through the PowerPoint. There's just 4 or 5 slides, and kind of talk about either some of the things that we've talked about with Tom, or just kind of general things that we do. So from a policy perspective, we don't have a policy requiring underground. We leave it up to the customers for any new business. Sometimes we have situations where it works better to go overhead, either because of the rocky conditions or just the terrain. There are also sometimes situations where we have stuff that's underground that gets washed out, and we end up putting it back overhead again. So depending upon where it is. So it's really a case-by-case basis, and most often we let the customers decide.
Could you give an example of that? You said you have had stuff underground that gets washed out and then it goes back up overhead.
Yeah, so occasionally we'll be running down, we've got it underground along a road that's along a river that then gets washed out, or we get some flooding and stuff. And so we'll try to fix it, replace it, do it a couple of times, and then eventually we say, okay, this is prone to flooding. We're going to put it back overhead again. So occasionally that stuff happens.
Thank you.
When I worked in San Francisco for Pacific Gas and Electric, and there were a lot of liquefaction areas that made it difficult to keep conduits and vaults and things underground. They would float, or they would run into issues where they would pull elbows apart and stuff. And so there are some conditions that make it difficult. The city of Tillamook has a policy that requires underground of anything new that's outside the road, the right of way. So the city of Tillamook has that. But no other city governments, the rest of the cities in the county, we've got franchise agreements with them. And so we collect a fee from each of the customers in that area. And then, except for a little bit of administrative costs, we give those dollars to the cities. We always encourage them to use that for undergrounding projects and things that might come up. But as you know, when you get a stream of revenue for a while, sometimes that ends up in just the general fund and you have to use it for other things. But if cities can hang on to that, they can do a lot of work with some of those dollars. Remember that we're just one of the many overhead lines that you see that are out there. There are communication companies, fiber, and others that are running lines as well. And so whenever you're doing undergrounding projects, especially with ODOT, with 101 or Highway 6, it's great to have a municipality kind of project manage that. And that way you get all of the facilities underground. So just because we're PUD, we don't have the ability to really drag the others along with us. And a lot of times what'll happen is PUD will be underground and you'll still have the other lines up above. So all our transmission is overhead, and Doug talked about that. Anything that's, well, we've got our distribution voltages at 24.9, but our transmission voltages at 115 or 230 kV, and that's all overhead. And when you switch to that level of voltage, you're talking about different equipment, different people, different training if you want to do any of that underground. In fact, a lot of the underground transmission that you see across the country is inside pressure pipe that has nitrogen or some other kind of cooling in it because of the issues. They've got techniques that you can do it now in individual lines, et cetera. But even some of the larger utilities like Pacific Core and Portland General Electric contract out that underground transmission work. So it's not real feasible if you had an outage, if you decided to put underground transmission in, you had an outage and you had to wait for some contractor from somewhere to come to Tillamook to fix it. And so generally you won't see transmission lines underground. Next slide, please. So in our practice, like I said, the type of service is at the discretion of the customer. We found that if you are requiring everything to be underground, sometimes it's cost prohibitive for contractors to do some of the work in the county. And so we haven't pushed that yet. We always consider it. And you'll see a lot of areas that will do that and require that with their permitting and things like that, or you'll have a subdivision and everything will be underground. And it makes a lot of sense. When you're in a green field, that makes a lot of sense. You have a lot more flexibility. Converting things from overhead to underground is quite expensive. So if there's an electric service underground and we don't allow them to then put it overhead. So it's got to stay. And if they do some kind of work, we make sure that it stays underground. So we look at the economics and technical feasibility of underground all of our facilities, and that happens with our engineering group. They make all those decisions about how best to serve. And there are a lot of times that we, as we're replacing aging infrastructure, we look for opportunities to underground stuff. But there's a huge customer commitment whenever we convert from overhead to underground. If you can imagine, an overhead service goes to a weatherhead and then down to a meter base that goes in, and all that then would have to go underground, new meter base, new way of that stuff going in. So if we're going to do some kind of conversion, there's a customer impact, and there's a whole bunch of ways that you can address that. You can have the customers just say, hey, you're going to have to pay for that, and there's a charge. Sometimes you include that in the bill and they pay it off. Sometimes there's interest related. Sometimes you create a big program where you're charging all of your customers. And then as you're doing your underground work, you do all that conversion customer work and it's paid for that way by all the customers. There's a number of different ways that you can do it, and a number of municipalities do it different ways. Next slide. So long-term cost studies have shown that undergrounding an existing transmission and distribution system is about a 400 to 500% rate increase by the time you finish it. So if you wanted to do everything, pretty expensive, but like Tom said and Doug said, a lot of people are looking at this as a way to mitigate wildfire. Certainly we've got those issues here, not as severe as in other places, but there are some advantages to going underground. Instead of cars hitting poles, cars then hit the green transformers that you see and they back into them and things. And so you don't eliminate all of those types of outages. Generally, you'll have fewer outages, especially in with the winds that we get here on the coast. However, an outage for underground compared to overhead lasts much longer because, of course, we can't see where the outage is. It's underground somewhere. It could be some kind of connection. We might have trouble pulling the old wire, getting new wire in, et cetera. So, and a lot of the underground that was installed in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s were direct buried and they're not in pipes. So that just has to be excavated and worked on. So if you're just doing it in a green field, it's roughly about 3 times the cost as going overhead because of the conduit and the vaults and things that you need to put in. But if you're doing it, if you're going in and replacing an area, it's about 10 times the cost. So if we've got an existing overhead system and we replace that overhead system either by putting in new poles and conductors or transformers, things like that, to convert everything underground, it's about 10 times. And part of that is getting around all the other lines that are already existing underground, as well as some of those customer costs to, and for residents, it might be, nominal, but when you get into commercial and industrial, then it gets real expensive for converting. So some municipalities require a set amount of all overhead utilities be undergrounded on an annual basis, and they just set an ordinance and it says, you're going to put a mile underground or a mile and a half or 10 miles, whatever it is. And then those utilities all decide, they work together to put things underground. It's rare, but there are some folks that mostly for views and to get the wires out of the streets. But some are requiring it now because of wildfire and some of the other things that happen. They want to hang on to as many trees as they can, and trees and power lines during fires and heavy wind, dry conditions make it really difficult. And then we talked about those customer costs. Next slide. So we're doing some of the things right now. We're thinking about requiring all new secondary electric services to be underground. It might have an effect on some of the builders and some of the lots that we have that they might decide not to do some things. It's direct, then it directly affects the value of that property. Requiring any service alterations to be underground. So if someone needs to replace their meter base or replace some component, we would require it to go underground, just like we do with a lot of things where you have to bring things up to current code. Or developing a process to contribute towards some of those. Whenever we've got a big project that happens, we always try to contribute, and we think about what it would cost us to replace that. And we've got some future replacement costs. And so we try to donate that towards some of the projects. And in some ways that is just enough to push it over the hump for the municipality to go ahead and decide to do some undergrounding. So there are some opportunities when we do that. We've got a customer survey this year, and generally we'll ask about that, how much customers are willing to spend to see more undergrounding. Generally, it hasn't been, they haven't been interested in that, but we continue to ask that, and we'll do that again this fall. Just from a rates perspective, Bonneville Power Administration, where we get the majority of our rates, has indicated that they're looking at about a 14% rate increase in 2026, both on the power side and the transmission side. If we were to pass that through to our customers, that would be about an 8.5% increase for all of our customers. So costs of electricity are going up, and we really don't have enough in the Northwest. The latest forecast is by 2030, we'll need an additional 7,000 megawatts just for all the growth that we're seeing. So we're out of power here in Tillamook as far as what our allocation is from Bonneville. So anything that we buy from now on is at a premium. We no longer have any tier one power that we can buy from Bonneville. All of it is based on the market and their tier two rate, which is heavily based on the market. So that's happening all over the Northwest. And so we have to be careful about what costs we want to continue to add, even if it makes sense long term. And then our 5-year strategic plan includes exploring some of these underground options. And so we continue to look at those things and certainly look for those opportunities to do that when we can.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to make a comment or two, maybe a question. One of the things you're also doing, I didn't hear this, but I know you guys are doing this, is you're looking at any and all opportunities to remove poles that are not in use and even wires that are not in use. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, we're required to do that. We do that quite well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the communications companies don't.
Yeah.
We continue to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from the communications companies by leveling sanctions because they continue to leave conditions on our poles that are unsafe, and that we do our inspections, and it's extremely difficult for them to come and take care of those issues. The PUC seems not to want to address it as much as they could. And so in some cases, we even have hired contractors and then billed those companies to get that work done. And sometimes we're successful in collecting that, sometimes we aren't.
I want to go back to a couple of things you said. You talked about customer equipment costs, and I'm not sure, second or third slide there. What are the customer equipment things that would change if you moved from above ground to underground power for, let's just say, a residence?
Yeah, so just for a residence, a lot of times the equipment that they have, it's unable for us to equip them the same if we go underground. So generally what happens when a new service is installed, all the conduit is put in by the customer, and then we put the wires in and make all the connections. And so all of that equipment trenching up to the site, which is generally customer's responsibility, and then the meter base, et cetera, then needs to convert. If you've got the feed of the power coming into the top of the base, now you need to have the feed coming in from the bottom. And then the power going into the house. And so generally you're going to change out that meter base. And so for a residence, like I said, there are some costs associated with that, not as much. When you get into commercial property and industrial property, in some cases you're wholesale removing everything that they have and completing it. And so it could be into the tens of thousands of dollars for them.
Okay. Another question. You used the word secondary, and I didn't understand that. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, in the electric industry, we talk about primary and secondary all the time. So we've got the transmission line, which is the super high voltage, 115, 230, 500, et cetera. Big, lots of voltage, cross-country lines that go into our substations. Then from our substations, we've got a transformer that steps that power down to something that we can use in our distribution system. For us, it's 24/9. That goes out to feed all the neighborhood. We have an additional transformer. Sometimes that might be a pole mounted or it might be on the ground on top of a vault. And that transformer then takes it from that 24.9 down into the 122.40 or 244.80, 208, et cetera, that can come into your house or business. And anything past that second transformer, we call secondary. So that's primary is in between the substation and that transformer, and then secondary. And so you'll see the secondary lines run from your transformer on the pole into your house. And generally you'll have two wrapped or encased wires along with an exposed neutral that are twisted together coming into your place.
Mhm.
So everybody's got a secondary coming into their space, and that's just stepping it down from that high voltage that you can't use.
I have not seen a survey that asked the question about underground power. And I'm not sure. I have been a customer for 8 years now.
Yeah,
And we talked about this, I think, 3, 4, 5 years ago
yeah,
about a survey. And it sounds like a great idea. I think it's good to let people know and to talk about it and kind of get the public engaged in this.
right.
Let them know what you're doing and why you're doing it and all that. And I guess honestly, I'd like to see more communication out, maybe in the rural, maybe in the emails you send out or whatever approach you guys think would be better.
Yeah.
That's just my thoughts.
Thanks. And we appreciate all the feedback. We kind of switched away from, we used to do just a landline uh, survey with our customers, and we used to hire a company to do that. We were really hitting a specific demographic doing that and so we decided to cast a little bit bigger net. And now our public relations group does that, and we're able to grab a bunch of different demographics from different areas, but still it's a small subset of our customers, and so you may not have seen it.
Okay.
Well, one other thing that, before we can conclude here, when Tom and I talked last, he had what I thought was actually a pretty good idea, and I think it occurs now, but maybe it could be enhanced, and that is when any utility, whether it's wastewater or water or fiber or electric or maybe something else, is trenching, if they notified all the others at the same time. And maybe it happened, I know Casey can speak to that, and that's something where the county could be involved and not necessarily have an ordinance, but some kind of guidance or notice or requirement that if you're going to dig a trench in right of way, you got to do it with some notice, maybe 48 hours, unless it's an emergency, like after a car accident or something, that you're going to notify them so they have a chance to come in and maybe restructure what they do now. So could either of you speak to that? Tom, we talked about that the other day.
Okay. And quickly, actually, that idea came from Todd and KC when I talked to them last winter, I think. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, there are a number of municipalities that require that. Generally, they're in areas that are doing a lot of undergrounding. And so it's a way for them to share trenches and to do things together. Occasionally we'll do it now. It's rare that anyone does open trenching anymore, where you get a Traco or a backhoe and open a trench. You do with water and wastewater, but generally you're not using those trenches for joint trenches. But when you're putting in any of your comm lines, generally now they're all bored in. And so there isn't the same advantages that you used to have with open trenching. And we don't have any natural gas in the county, where a lot of natural gas is still open trenched. And so there are a lot of opportunities to go in open trenches when you've got natural gas projects happening all over. But regardless, it would be some additional administrative costs for all of us to maintain a project like that. But then at least when we are doing those types of projects, there would be opportunities maybe to have some joint trench opportunities.
So I don't know where we go from here, except we've had a nice conversation. And like I say, this goes back number of years and there's lots of good reasons why it should be done. And then there are more good reasons maybe why it shouldn't or can't or is not being done. And they include, as I said, financial, logistical, just pure operational. And I think you have to remember in Tillamook County, we have a higher than average water table than they might say in Morrow County or Eastern Oregon or Idaho or somewhere like that. Having served on that board for 15 years, in fact, I was one of the two that interviewed Todd and ended up hiring him. It's one of my better decisions, by the way. Worked out fine. He's still here. I think what can be done in just my opinion here in Tillamook County is what's being done is should be done, and we're operating, we PUD, all of us are operating under best practices and standard practices of the industry. And I don't know how many hundreds of hours I've sat in meetings in Portland and elsewhere with other utilities, and they have exactly the same dilemma. The logistics might be a little different and the soil might be different, but it's the same thing. It's cost, it's service, it's convenience, it's safety. It's all of those. And one thing I learned about the utility industry is they really employ a lot of highly educated, smart people. They truly do. I say above an average organization. There are lots of people with advanced educations and lots of engineers, and they do the things that make sense both mechanically, structurally, electrically, from a safety point of view. And we have, I think, in America, probably one of the best electric utility systems in the world, maybe the best, which is not to say it's perfect, but it works. And we do lose our power because trees get blown over and so on. So I'm just for my part, and having had the history there, I'm not sure the county has or should have a role in requiring anything other than what happens now. They do the best practice, and I can tell you the number one thing that they would all tell you, those in the room, is safety. They're also not going to put any of their educated, talented, and experienced staff at risk. And we all know who've been around that for some period of time. We could cite people who were actually killed servicing electrical stuff. And there was one in Central Lincoln not too many years ago who touched a primary wire and immediately became disabled. He's lucky to be alive. And so it's a dangerous business as well as being a necessity and a very necessary business. So I don't know where we take it from here. As I said, Tom and I have been talking about this now for maybe a decade here in a little while, but I'll be happy to entertain some more ideas. But for the county's part, I guess I would say I'm not sure we have a role beyond what they do. Because they're a different utility. Now, I've been working on the water and wastewater and some of those, and that's a different subject, and it's altogether different. It's similar, but it's different, profoundly different. And it's not the case with our PUD. And by the way, the PUD does not have a whole lot to do with the Public Utilities Commission. And a lot of people don't understand that. They say, well, why don't we go to Salem and get the PUC? Well, the PUC regulates investor-owned utilities like Idaho Power and the big ones, Pacific Power and Portland General. The other ones that are co-ops or municipals or PUDs are generally governed by their own city council or their board, elected officials. The rates for our PUD are set by the 5 elected people, not the state of Oregon. So anyway, we could, go on all afternoon, but for my part in all of this, I think the county probably does not have an active role unless we wanted to someday consider some kind of a requirement or ordinance to move things toward being underground. But I have enough confidence in Tillamook PUD. They're going to do the right thing. They're going to do the cost-effective thing. And one thing that they will tell you, and that I've learned over the years, a lot of people here with a lot of money. There's a lot of people who don't. And there's a lot of people that struggle to pay $120 electric bill. And we're very fortunate because on either side, the rates are roughly a third higher. We have Pacific Power that way in Lincoln City, and we have Pacific Power in Clatsop County, and you have Portland General Electric that way. And they're all at least a third higher than what we pay right here. So I'll stop talking and you can kick them out or let them go on, whatever you want to
We've
do.
got 3 other things to do today, so I'll keep my comments short. I think that it's a great conversation to have. Thank you, Tom, for bringing it to have this conversation. I appreciate us all having it in the same forum. I think that's really useful. And it sounds to me like undergrounding is on the radar of PUD and to Doug's point, looking at when it fits best practice, when it is financially viable, that you all will do that. But that really keeping in mind the nature of our community at this point and the nature of increasing rates of power. And this is probably not a time that I would see that we as government would want to add something as a requirement. There's just a lot happening out there that financially is challenging. And I think you all have your finger on the pulse of what people are paying and able to pay. You see that through your assistance program. Those who are unable to pay and those who are struggling to pay. So I think you kind of know what the appetite and ability would be to add to customers' cost at this point. So I think it's on your radar, and I'm happy to have you continue to check in with us and tell us how that's working. But I think it's in your hands, probably where it belongs.
Thank you. I agree. I'm grateful for the conversation. I think it's interesting. It's worth talking about. We're not the only people who are talking about it. I think particularly it became the public awareness of the topic became particularly acute as a result of the fires in Paradise. And so I've been hearing about it since then. And so I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I'm encouraged to hear from you, Todd, and see in your presentation that PUD is talking about things, about approaches you could take. And I appreciate that. I appreciate PUD. I appreciate that we have you in this community, that we have great confidence in the services that we receive, that we are able to, that our bills are lower than other places, that they're excellent jobs. People have great jobs here as a result of PUD. And as part of that, I trust that you are leading us in best practices and in making the best decisions for the community. I think there's a part of me that thinks, oh, it would be ideal if we could underground power in the places that are vulnerable to wildfire. And I didn't know before today that most of those access points are bored, so then I'm picturing what would that look like going up the upper Nestucca, or the places that are really prone to wildfire. It would be so difficult and so expensive to do that for a limited number of customers who couldn't possibly pay for it, that everybody else would have to be paying for it. And so where's the break point there? And so I'm sure that is all the work that you and your board and your team are contemplating, how can we do the best we can do and still have it be affordable and safe for everybody. And so I agree with my colleagues that I trust you to do this work. And I'm grateful to Tom for bringing up the conversation, because it's an important conversation and everybody cares, in particular about wildfire and safety. Everybody cares about it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Okay. Our next topic is the radio bond analysis. Rachel.
I'm going to speak briefly, and then Doug's going to carry the water on this one because it's way above my understanding of bonds. So the board meeting last week reached consensus on what we wanted to proceed with the rate for the public safety radio bond. The project cost is $24,135,000, and we agreed that we would ask for that amount. Excuse me. The amount is $26,135,000. We have $2 million. We agreed that we would proceed with the $24,135,000 bond. That equates to 32 cents a thousand. So it's been my understanding that the fees for bond counsel and Piper Sandler would come out of when those bonds were sold. So the value of those fees was not on top of the project cost. So we've known that. But in developing the ballot title and confirming those costs, Piper Sandler suggested another approach that I wish would have came up last week, but it didn't. So there is another approach where we could add the fees on top of it and increase what we ask the voters to pay, which is 24, as far as the question goes, $24,400,000, which increases the rate to 33 cents. So what I need from you today is, do we want to add the fees on top and ask for the full amount, or will they be embedded in the amount that we get back when the bonds are sold because there's a premium there? And I'll let Doug do a better job of explaining it.
Okay, so the project cost is, as she explained, per federal, the company that did it, is 24,135,000, and that includes a 20% contingency, which sounds like a lot, but remember, we're buying over 1,000 radios. We're adding one tower and then servicing 12 other towers. And so it's really, in my judgment, a pretty complex project. There are lots of moving parts. There's over a dozen agencies. There's over 1,000 mobile and handheld radios and some pagers. Then there's some fixed base stations, and there's all the tower work. There's some cabling, there's microwave equipment. So to say 20% is adequate, it may be, but worst case, it would come up a little short. So the number, including the 20%, is the 24,135,000. And it was 25 when we first started the conversation. When I got into it anyway, it was 25. Then there was a revision that came from them very recently, and they knocked it down about 800 and some $1,000. So we're using that number, understanding in a perfect world it would be 22 something, but that's highly unlikely with a multi-year complex project. Something will go wrong, or they'll discover something. The ground will be unstable. I mean, who knows? It's like any other project. You carry a contingency. So we think that number is really, really good. So then the question is, there's two more major costs. One is bond counsel, which is roughly 30 grand. And the bond counsel does several things. They prepare the ballot title in conformance with what you have to ask, the number of words allowed under, and then referencing the Oregon Constitution. And that's why they all look the same essentially, and they're limited to like 20 words. Then there's an explanation below that, which they write, and it has to be truthful, accurate, and can't advocate yes or no. It simply says this is what it is. So then the next thing they do, they prepare either a POS, which is a preliminary operating official statement, or an OS operating statement that goes when the bonds are sold. There's representation by bond counsel, legal counsel, says to the investors, this is, in our opinion, tax exempt. This complies with all the laws and regulations of the state of Oregon, and Tillamook County has a mechanism in place to service the debt, blah, blah, blah. And they're anywhere from that thick to that thick, and you pay for that. Their fee for doing this is roughly, the fees together are about $265,000. So about 30 of that appears to be bond counsel. That's what they charge for writing that and giving their legal opinion and blessing it. The other is the underwriting cost for Piper, and they're the ones who actually market it. So the question before us is, do you want them to take it out of what amounts to the contingency, out of the amount we started with, which means the contingency would be reduced by $265,000, or do we add that on? And the mathematics of adding it on take the rate from roughly 32 cents per 1,000 of assessed value to 33 cents. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but it generates $265,000 over 16 years. And the bond will be amortized as we decided before. We looked at 10, 15, and 20, if you remember the three different periods. And we said, well, 15 is about the average life we expect. If you go 20, we'll be sort of in the same predicament we are now. If you wait 20 years to replace something that's high tech, you're probably gonna have obsolete equipment. And so the worst thing you want to do is pay for something that's not even in service. So 15 sounds about right. 10 compressed it a little too much and made it a little harder to ask people to validate. So 15 is a sweet spot, and the bond underwriters agree with that. And it works out if you had a $300,000 home at assessed value, which would make the market value, the real market value, somewhere around 500 to 600, based on our 50% that is across the county. There would be less than $100 a year. It'd be roughly 33 cents times 300 is $99 a year. And of course, that varies. If you've got an expensive beach home, it's more. If you have a lesser home, it would be somewhat less. So that's what we want to tell the voters, is that 33 cents is the best good faith estimate that will be published and marketed. Could be slightly different because no one can predict interest rates in January or February, whenever the market is actually go on the market. Might do it right after the election, but you have to wait till the election is certified, which would be November 25th, or, takes a little bit of time. So that's the decision today. And right now, everything is structured on the 24,400,000, which includes the project cost, full contingency, the bond fee, and legal counsel. And basically, it's all in. That would be the amount that was borrowed. Separate from all of that is a discussion on a bond premium. And I don't think we have to decide that today. But essentially, what a bond premium is the par amount is the interest rate that is specified on a bond. The market might be a little higher others, and frequently, like on the last bonds the county sold were the second half of the road bonds, and those were sold in 2018, and they had an interest rate of, got it here somewhere, of like 2.8 or somewhere in that range. But they were sold at a yield of 4%. So the county got a bond premium of almost $700,000 the last time around. And that's perfectly legal. It's done. It's a function of the market and how they're priced. And investors were willing to pay more because they got a higher interest rate than the market by about 120 basis points, which is 1.2%. Anyway, make a long, complicated story short. At some point, this board will have to decide if you want to sell it and get a little bit of a premium out of it or not. My personal view is, over the years, looking at bond premiums, there is no such thing as free money. Never has been. And so if you get more money back, you repay more money. That means that our taxpayers would pay slightly more than what the market was at the time the bonds were sold. And the college got a premium. The school district, Nestucca, got a premium. And again, it's commonly done, I would say more often than not, because there's an opportunity. The investors are happy. They get a little more money, but they pay more for it. The issuers are happy because they've got a little more than what the fixed cost was of whatever it is they're doing. But the people paying it pay a little more, not a lot, but somewhat more, because there's no such thing as free money. So that's a decision we're going to have to think about down the road. Do we sell it at the market, which could be whatever it is? Let's say the market is 3.3% for municipal bonds, tax-free in the state of Oregon, tax-free in America on January. So do we sell them at 3.3, or do they go out on the market at 4.3? And that extra one point would be a higher yield to the investors, whether they're institutional like a mutual fund or individual like, widows and orphans buying the old money, bonds for their retirement or their income. But they pay more, and in return they get paid more. But the ultimate payer is all of us who live here and pay taxes. So that's kind of that's a financial and a legal and even a moral question, my opinion, that needs to be addressed when the bonds are sold. The issue today is, do we take it up one penny and have separate the costs of issuance and legal, or do we fold it into the amount and thereby reduce the contingency by an equivalent amount?
How much is the full contingency? You said 20%, but
The 20,
how much do we
20%
reduce
is
it by?
It's roughly $4,820,000. That's the contingency in the current budget.
20%. So if we took $200,000 off of that, we're reducing it by 1% or
A
something.
small percent, roughly. 1% would be 48,000, so it'd be like 5 or 6%, something like that.
So we'd be leaving a contingency of 14 or 15% instead of 20.
Yes.
Okay. Alternately, we can add it on top and then we know for sure that we have a 20% contingency plus we pay our fees.
Mhm.
In the event that we don't need our contingency, we get to the end of the project, hallelujah, look at that. It didn't take any more than what we thought. What happens to that contingency?
You can either buy down the bonds and pay them off earlier, save everybody a little interest. Or more likely, I would say the board, who's ever on the board at that time, would say, well, let's keep it and it's dedicated funds and the language will provide it can be used for maintenance or replenishment or whatever needed to happen connected to that project. In other words, it's tied to the project. You can't take it and pave a road, but you could buy more radios or repair the ones you have or fix a tower that blew over in the wind, something like that. And I'll ask legal counsel if I'm misstating this.
I think generally you're right. That's why you're paying $30,000 to bond counsel too.
Yes.
Their sentence includes that in a way that it makes it allowable. I mean, that's the key,
Yes.
right? That sentence, the wording of the bond is key, is what
Mhm.
I have heard in the ether, right?
Right.
And so that being within it would be the key piece. Um,
And he's exactly right. That's what you're buying from the 30,000. And they've already made maybe half a dozen corrections or suggestions, on the language of the bond title and then the explanation statement that goes with it. And they say you can't, for example, we use the word obsolete. And they were concerned early on, can you prove that it's obsolete?
right,
And that's a fair question. It's a legal question and
right.
a practical question, I
Yeah.
guess. And it's still in there because I think we can demonstrate that it's obsolete. You can't get some parts
Right.
on the open market. They're not there. It is obsolete. And
Right.
that, isn't
So
that
we'll
right?
let
Rich?
bond counsel determine if that word is allowable or not. So back to the financial part, just to make sure I understand, if you don't mind me I just want to make sure I'm clear. So there's 20% contingency. If we take the fees out of that, we leave ourselves with only 15% contingency. If the project runs over beyond the 15% contingency, we have to find that money somewhere else. If we were to add it on, it becomes 33 cents per thousand instead of 32. We leave ourselves with a full 20% contingency, which if we don't end up using it, can be kept for the project based on what is in the title it says we could do, or it could be used to pay down the bonds early, which would help the people over here who ended up with the extra penny because we were setting ourselves up in the safest way possible.
I think you got it 100%.
Okay, and so looking at Nehalem Valley Health District as an example, or not the health district, looking at the
Right.
pool in CRD,
District.
they thought they were good. They thought they had enough contingency. The world changed. So I think my sense would be 33 cents per thousand is not significantly scarier than 32 cents per thousand, but I think it's far scarier to get to the end of the project and say, sorry, we don't actually have a radio system because now we are, however many $100,000 short. So, I mean, I guess that would be my thought would be, if let's make sure we have what we need to do this and that we don't find ourselves needing to go back to the voters and say, sorry, we were close, but not quite. So if we feel a 20% contingency is needed, I would tack it on.
And I think you have it exactly. And that is my concern too. The last thing, I think whoever's sitting at these tables, 15 years, it would have to go back and say, well, they didn't do it quite right. We're gonna need a little more money. I think that's a terrible thing because I think we could all agree that in 15 years, there'll be another series of needs that are across the county of some kind. And so this needs to be like the road bond, and the road bond did what it said it would do. Now asphalt goes up and down like that, and maybe you didn't get every single road done you contemplated, but there was no ask to do anything more. It went out and it went exactly like it was told. And if we could do the same thing on this, the county will retain its credibility for a long time, at least on this part of it here. So that is my best recommendation. Now, what you really hope for is of course that the 20% contingency And I've worked on a lot of projects, and Rachel has too. It can be perfectly adequate on a pretty straightforward project. This one has so many parts, like I said, it's spread all over the county. It's in rough terrain, it's outdoors. We don't know what some of the solar characteristics would be. You know, all these things could come back and say, geez, you know, we're $600,000 short, even with the 20%. Could be, but you know, I don't know. We're taking the best estimate of people who do this all the time, all over the country.
And is 20%, is that a standard contingency, or is it the contingency that was recommended for this project, or how is that calculated?
I would say that's a pretty standard, healthy contingency for a project estimate that is this underdeveloped. As you start out with a big contingency, as you hone in on design, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. When you go out to bid, it may be 10 or 5 or 10, somewhere between 5 and 15. It reduces, and it's also reduced based on the amount of unknowns. If it's a very straightforward project, you have full engineering, the site's pretty straightforward, maybe you're 5. I think even with this project, when we go out to bid, we will still want to have a good contingency in our budget, or we already have it, but but Doug's absolutely right. This is a very scary project to ask for money for and not know how it's going to come out on the other side. So
Here's another thing that I think about. I'm going to say it troubles me, but not really. This market, as I understand it, and I've asked the people involved in our own radio people, this is a relatively thin market, meaning there aren't 15 people selling these systems. There's 5 or 6, but from what I understand, there's probably only going to be 2 or 3, if we're lucky, that bid on this project.
Yeah.
And so if they know that, they, like Motorola is one of them, they're wonderful, great equipment. But if they're the only bidder, the one of only 2, they're not going to give you their deepest discount. I mean, that's the reality of the marketplaces. And so you may pay a little more, where if you had 5 people looking at this account, and this is a nice project at $25 million, but America's pretty big, a lot of radios in America. And so this is relatively small potatoes to these big giant national or international companies. And so they may say, well, we're busy, we got a lot of work in Georgia or Washington DC or somewhere else, we'll just pass on this one. So we get down to 1 or 2 or 3 companies, you may not get the absolute rock bottom, which means you're going to pay maybe an extra $1 million. But we're depending on federal to say, you know, this is the market, we understand the market, and this is the going price. I'm just saying, I'm just personally, from my experiences, when you have 5 or 6 or 7 companies interested in your business, you're better off than if you have 2.
True. Okay. You concur with Doug's recommendation? Okay. All right.
24.4 and 33 cents.
And moving on to the July 24 TLT meeting prep.
So we have the board briefing next week with an hour and a half allocated. Again, another hard stop at 3:30 because we have another topic where people are coming in at 3:30 to talk about another topic. So I wanted to prep if you want to set an agenda for the meeting with the city mayors and managers about the TLT increase, or is it just kind of a free form roundtable? I don't have anything prepared for you, but if you want to prepare something, now's the time to talk about it.
Well, I think we do want to have some direction in terms of what we are asking them. I think in our last conversation, we concluded that we concluded when we want to go out for it. We concluded that we're thinking about 15%. We concluded how we want to spend it. I don't think we concluded what we're asking of the cities. Are we asking anything of them? Are we just telling them, this is our plan? So if if the cities are interested in also raising their TLT tax, we don't want this to come as a surprise to anyone. So we're just letting you know what we're up to. We're, what are we asking of them, or are we just informing them? Because I don't know.
That's what I'm asking you
Okay.
to talk about today.
Okay.
So
I don't want to be prescriptive in what you may be thinking and how you want to approach this.
I was actually kind of asking Bill.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel.
I saw more information. I don't know. You're gonna say, and they have the option of saying, we'll go and do back to our city councils and do a resolution saying, well, you know, we're gonna agree to all of this.
Do they have to agree to it?
No,
Right.
at all.
I think there's some education probably of who will come for the cities, since they probably are largely new since this happened in 2013. So I feel like there is that piece, Bill, that they're going to be looking to us to say, so what does this mean for us?
Yeah.
So if you're ready to speak, just not giving legal advice, obviously, but just that, you know, at this point, 1% of whatever you have goes back to the commissioners, and for you as cities, what lays ahead of you is your choice about what you wish to do with your TLT. Our expectation at this point is that we would raise ours to 15 and that we would credit you up to as much as 14 if you so chose, right? If we're assuming we wanted to keep them with the 1% coming to us.
I think I can do that.
Just thinking many of them may not, that, as none of us knew what the conversation was and we couldn't even remember in our historical brains, they won't know. So a little history as well might be helpful.
Really, it's two jurisdictions. Isn't it? Well, I guess it's not.
Well, no, you have Manzanita, Rockaway, and Tillamook.
Yeah,
That would
three,
be the
right, three.
big three. I'm not sure what they do in Garibaldi. What do they do there?
They have TLT.
Yeah, I think.
Everybody has the TLT.
It's just in terms of revenue.
So we're not suggesting that we get a different rate. We're still suggesting that we get the 1% regardless of whether they stay where they're at or if they want to go up to 15% with us. We're still asking for 1%.
And they may not even have thought of that yet or hasn't come on their agenda.
Right.
What I thought this meeting might be is we could talk about where we appear to be heading and then just have a conversation and say, look, here's, you know, we're considering this because of A, B, C, D, E, and then see how they question or react and say, well, you know, there's going to be some decisions in before you stay like you are, change what you do. And if you do, then there's some sidebars and so on, and see what they say. And I think there's something to be gained by having us all in the room and the courtesy that we were extending them by inviting them over. And we're not saying, hey, we're gonna do this, you guys step aside, get out of the way. And say, you know, kind of all in the same program here.
I think we do want to be clear though, if we're still thinking that we want 1%, or are we just saying you do what you do in your boundaries and we won't touch any of that?
Well, I think we want to continue with 1%.
I would agree with you. That wasn't what I heard in what Doug said. What I
No,
heard in what
well,
Doug said was
I should have said,
anything.
no, I think we should make it as clear as we can if we're on legal ground that we like that 1% differential, that's 7% of our income that's generated, and that's a significant number. So we could say that, you know, however we structure it, if we all go up, then if we can keep that differential, that works for us, and then you people can do what you need to do and what you're comfortable with, and what your city council wants to do. They may say, well, we think it's too high and we're gonna stay at this rate, and I guess, so if the city of Rockaway charges 10% and we charge 15, they're paying 15 if you rent a room plus the state, right? So then we get 5. So that would work to our benefit, but I don't think, for my part, I wouldn't want to insist on that. I would, if it happens, it happens. But I think nearly all these people are gonna say, well, yeah, if it makes sense and you're gonna put it before the voters, then we'll just follow along and either do it by ordinance, or I don't know if they have to have their people vote on it or not.
Well, wait, I got confused by what you just said, because if we're charging 15, the city of Rockaway charges what they charge, and we just get 1% of what they charge. We don't get.
No, we would get, they would charge what they would charge, And then we've increased our portion. Now, if they want to follow it along to where the margin is still 1%, then we get the same 1%. As I understand it. Now, I suppose it could be different, but I think we're putting a decision on them to stay where they are and county benefits or move it along, slide it up just behind where we are.
Okay, so that is what we need to tease out because I didn't. Maybe I'm missing the boat here. So Rockaway Beach charges what they charge for people staying within the city limits of Rockaway Beach. They charge what they charge, and they pay us 1%. So we're charging 15% in
I
unincorporated
think
Tillamook
they
County.
charge what they charge plus 1.75 for the state. So if your room's $100, they're gonna charge $10 plus $1 more plus $1.75. So the room is gonna cost you like $112, almost $113.
Okay,
And of that 113, Rockaway's gonna keep their 10, and then the 1%'s coming here,
Mhm.
and the 1 3/4 going to Salem.
okay,
I
right.
think that's the way it
I
works.
agree with that. And if we increase ours to 15, we're only increasing it in the unincorporated area. So I don't think that us increasing to 15 impacts Rockaway Beach at all. I think we still get their 1%.
So this is what you have not decided yet. It's an
Okay.
outstanding question. Does it apply to the cities or not?
Oh, I don't think so.
Currently, so currently it
Currently, it
does.
does. The
Currently,
outstanding question is, will this apply to cities? Question mark.
Yeah, I don't think we should twist cities' arms. I think we leave our arrangement with them as it is currently.
but see, our arrangement as it is currently, it does apply to them. I mean, ours applies all across the county. If you read our language, what we said is we're gonna charge 10%. And we will give you a credit of up to 9% if you want to charge we won't, we're saying we're not asking you to stack, right? But we are gonna charge 10%. And if you want to keep 9% of it, you can do that. You can keep whatever you set your level at, you keep that. It's not stacking. But we get whatever's on top of that. When we started, if I understand correctly, there were cities that were not yet at 9%.
I believe that's correct.
And then they went, oh, wait a minute, you're gonna get everything between what we charge and 10%. So they raised it to 9% because we allowed them that amount out of what we were charging, and then we charge it, we collect it, is that right? And then we give back to them.
I think they keep it themselves.
They
Yeah,
keep
they-
themselves and they just pay us the 1%.
Regardless, we're in the exact same boat again.
Yeah.
It's either gonna apply or not, and if it doesn't apply, it's gonna just stay how it is. And if it does apply, we're gonna raise it to X, we're gonna say we're taking whatever that difference is, and they're either gonna raise it and we're still at 1% or they won't. But presumably they would raise it, I would guess. So again, I don't think you have to decide today. I think these are outstanding questions that if they're still outstanding going into next week, it's okay. My understanding in part of the purpose of next week's meeting is you didn't want to decide that without talking to the cities first. So I think it's okay. It's an outstanding question. Again, I just want you to be very clear on where you are and what is portrayed at the meeting next week.
Well, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, because obviously we all didn't have the same understanding.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think if we're making an ask of the cities, we need to be clear about that. And if, at least spelling out the options.
So I would recommend for you as chair to do a summary of what we know, which you just did at the beginning of this conversation, and what is still outstanding. So we don't know what the split is on public safety yet. We don't know if this is going to apply to the cities. There's a couple of options. We're here to hear from you today. There was also a question of if there's a cap or if it's going to vary across cities.
I thought, maybe wrongly, that the board was inclined to continue to collect taxes in the city limits, but that's not necessarily true, as I understand this. Maybe you'll decide, like a lot of other county jurisdictions, to not have the tax apply in the incorporated cities. Is that still on the
I think
table?
that's part of the conversation.
Okay.
So I think part of what's important is that to the cities that are here, we explain how the current county ordinance is structured which is that it does apply to all, and we get 1% from them and they get the rest, and that at this point across the county, everybody's pretty uniform,
Yeah.
right? And that we're gonna go up, and the question is, are they looking at going up, keeping that 1% payment to the county? Or, what would they be thinking? We can withdraw, we can give up that 1% and just go only in the unincorporated county. But if they're inclined to join us and go up and that 1% can stick, why would we not? But
I think if we ended up or even went deep into a conversation on them and us, that we're gonna get some pushback from the lodging properties in the rural areas. They're saying, hey, we charge our customers a whole lot more than the ones that are staying in Manzanita or Rockaway. So what, to me, the fairest way is you come to Tillamook County, here's what it costs, and how the government's divided up, that's irrelevant to the people coming there.
Right, and I think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that the cities are, they, they are self-directed. So we can't tell them,
Absolutely,
you
yeah.
have to raise to up to 15% with us, because they may or may not want to.
And if they don't, that's more TLT that goes to the county. But I think, given what happened last time, if it passes and gets raised, they're not, but they would probably be grandfathered in. If they don't raise it before it passes, do they have a chance to raise it?
I think so.
They do? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. This is completely
Yeah.
turned around from the way we did it the first time, by the way. My recollection is, and might be a little fuzzy, is the board really didn't want very much to engage the cities. They just want, the ordinance just says it applies in the cities. And the way that it applied in the cities was that the various municipalities, it passed in those cities. So regardless of what the city wanted to do, the county got what it wanted, if I'm being clear. Does that make sense to you?
Well, some of the cities already had it before
Yes.
the county.
Yes, they did. In fact, most of them did. I think all of them did.
Okay.
so again, I think it's important to in this meeting, Bill, if you or Commissioner Bell, whoever wants to explain that the ordinance as it sits today, per the commissioners who did it previously, is it applies in all cities, and it was a vote that went to all voters. So
Right.
for the cities, the opportunity is, this is going to all voters. So it's actually an opportunity for them, if they choose to join us in the 15, we're setting that up for them. They don't have to take it to their voters. They don't have to do it as an ordinance. They don't have to do any of that. If they happen to want to join us, we'll apply it in their city. We'll stick with that. You get to keep all of it but 1%. And so we're going to do all this work, do the work and get it passed, and you get the benefit of it. And then we can ask any cities if they do not want to participate in that, if they wish to not have it levied in their city, and do their own thing, we can make that available if we so choose, but it makes it harder to do the ballot measure potentially, because
Yeah,
it
then
would
how does that
say,
work? We would exclude cities that didn't want to.
yeah, I don't know. That's part of the conversation, right?
Yeah, the last ballot measure said it will apply in cities.
Yeah.
This-
So I guess the conversation is, last time we didn't ask you, but we, in the spirit of good partnership that we've
Yeah.
been working to build,
Yeah.
we want to ask you. We want to let you know what we're thinking. We want to ask you. We may complicate our process a bit, but and then after that statement, then it's Doug's organic conversation, right? About where does it go?
Rachel.
Maybe this will just be, we can talk about it and tell them how it works now, and then say, we'd like to get it up around 15%, put it before the voters, and then let them kind of give us if they're excited or not, or, kind of take temperature of the room.
Sure.
You were going to say something, Rachel.
No.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Do we know how many are coming? Are they all coming, or do we know?
I don't know.
I'd hate to not have one of the significant ones here, like, for sure, I think we should have the Tillamook and Manzanita and Rockaway, and then hopefully all of them, but if we're missing one of the key ones, I'd be less comfortable about trying to make a decision.
I'll check in with Deb about who's responded. Now I think we need to transition to our executive session.
Yeah, we had another topic too.
And I'll try to come up with something cogent by way of
Thank you.
introduction, to, at least how it works now, so.
Right.
And, maybe what the ramifications of going to 15% will be. to
Yeah, that'd be
you.
great. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and to Aaron's point, how it was passed originally and, and it could be that everybody in the room, other than you, Bill, or, is different, so it could very well be
Okay,
new information to everybody.
okay.
Maybe a copy of the ordinance available for people, just if they want to take it, because I'm sure that they're gonna take it with them, take it to their legal counsels and otherwise and go,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah,
If they're new in particular.
okay. And I'll check and see who has responded to that invitation and maybe make some calls and see, invite people personally, just in case, because sometimes people just miss their invitations, their email invitation. Okay, do you want to go to the executive session now? Or do you want to talk about the last thing? I mean, you said you needed 30 minutes, so I'm respecting
Yeah.
that.
How do you want back to this, how do you want the room set up? Do you want this format? I was thinking it'd be more leadership team with as many people we're gonna
That
have
would be
here.
perfect. Yes,
Anything else
Sean.
you need from me?
I think so on that. Shall we go into our executive session now? So we're sure to have time for it. And if there's time at the end, do our last topic.
Yeah.
Okay,
Which could get postponed.
okay.
192-6602E.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And are we expecting somebody else?
No.
Okay.